Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I welcome once again all the friends, the learners, the students, the mentors, teachers to this 16th lecture of the project management series. And today we discuss a very important area which is called project risk management. As we all know that we are often faced with situations where the risk conditions exist. We will discuss all these details, but before starting the formal lecture of the day, I offer and recite few verses from the Holy Quran. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Inna anzalnahu fi laylatil qadr. وما أدراك ما ليلة القدر ليلة القدر خير من ألف شهر تنزل الملائكة والروح فيها بإذن ربهم من كل أمر سلام هي حتى مطلع الفجر صدق الله العظيم. So risk management, which is a very important part of the decision making, because all the managers, whether in projects or outside, are many times faced with a risk situation, and certainly making a decision in the risk situation is highly challenging. Okay, so there are some quotes, for example, from the Herodotus: great needs are usually brought at great risks. So great deeds are accomplished when you have high risks. And if the Creator had a purpose in equipping us with a neck, He surely meant us to stick it out. Arthur Koestler. If you don't risk anything, you risk even more. Erika Jong. And if you want to achieve a high goal, you are going to have to take some chances. Alberto Salazar. Similarly, it is impossible to begin to learn that which one thinks one already knows. I'm always doing that which I can't do in order that I may learn how to do it. Pablo Picasso. One of the greatest joys known to the man is take flight into ignorance in search of knowledge. All our knowledge has its origin in its perceptions. Da Vinci. We are what we repeatedly do. Aristotle. The final obstacle in the belief that there is an obstacle. Imagination is more important than knowledge. For while knowledge defines all currently know and understood, and understand, imagination points to all we might yet discover and create. Einstein. Now, this is just a very famous decision-making cycle or decision-making process. And if we define the decision-making, this is just a process through which we try to select the best available alternative to solve a particular problem. But when we look at the process in this diagram, you see that first of all, the first and the most important step is to understand the situation or context of the decision making. And this is really very important because decisions would change from context to context and situation to situations. So the first and the most important is to understand the situation in which you are taking the decision. For example, there might be certainty, there might be risk, there might be high uncertainty. For example, in the current COVID situations, we are really faced with many challenges, and it is really very important to understand the situation. The second step is to define the problem, which is really very important. For example, if we just presently look at the present situation of the Karakoram International University, one of the biggest problems we face is to carry out the spring semester of 2020, which has been uh, we could not start it because of the fact that there was a COVID-19 and we had just opened the university. And within 1 week time, we had to close the university and call emergency, and the students were not allowed to come to university as per the policy of the government. So certainly the biggest challenge for us is to solve this problem, that how can we be back to the university. And at the same time, it also means something like 120 million fee revenue, which we have to collect in this situation. The second is that what are the objectives? You have to define the objectives you want to achieve through this solution of the problems. For example, the problem we face at the moment is to open the university, and definitely the objective is very clear that we should start the spring semester when we complete that before the start of the fall semester, and we again at the same time can also continue the students to learn, and at the same time we are faced with the revenue shortages, so we would like to receive the maximum dues we are yet to receive from the students. And then once we diagnose the problem, we try to see that what are the various sources of these problems and what can be the different aspects. But please remember that many times we more focus on the symptoms of the problem instead of the problem itself. So it's very important that you separate the problem from the symptoms, and you diagnose the problem in a way which can be addressed. Then we develop the alternative solutions. For example, we are looking for 3 solutions at the moment. The first solution, which is very optimistic, that inshallah when the university will be open as per the government plan after the Eid holidays, that is on 1st of June, we will resume, and we have planned a compressed semester of 3 months or 2.5 months. In that case, we would continue to give our compressed semester from June, July, and August, and then we would have a break of 1 week, and then we will start the fall semester in the second week of September. The second situation can be that this is the first alternative. The second alternative, if the government even extends this situation towards the end of June, and then we are in a position to start in the early July. In that case, also we have planned to have a compressed 2.5 months semester, and that would mean that we will continue in July, August, and up to 15th of September. And in such case, we will go for the situation in which we would take our new semester maybe towards the end of September. The fall semester will be convened in the September. The third, which is the most pessimistic scenario, in which we also think on the third alternative, that even if the university is not opened in the end of July, then certainly we may go for the online education, and in that case, the admission of the fall semester can be delayed to the end of September and even October. But certainly, this is a very difficult situation for people like us at Karakoram University, because unfortunately, the summer, the winter is again starting from the January, and we cannot extend beyond 31st of December or mid of January, and in that case we have to close the university for at least 1.5 to 2 months. So we see these different alternatives, that what are the different alternatives and what are their benefits and costs. And the third or fourth alternative can be online education from the 1st of June if the university does not open. But all these options have its own strengths and weaknesses. So for that, we evaluate the alternatives in terms of benefits and cost, and see that what can be the best alternative in terms of more benefits and less cost, and also more feasibility. So we choose the best alternative out of all these 3 or 4 alternatives, and then we go to implement these alternatives and see that, review the situation, and see that whether after the implementation of the decision, do we get the results as per our plan or not. So this can be a situation in which we can go for decision making based on this process. Now, when we are dealing with the decision making, there can be different kind of situation. For example, the most normal is the certainty, where we are sure about the outcome of the decision, and where the decision is only one, unique and distinct. So in this case, certainly there is no problem, and we are sure. For example, if the university is open on 1st of June, then we will be certain that we will be able to complete the spring semester in 3 months' time, and we will not have much problem. But if but again, the probability of this is not more than 50%. So there can be two situations that either universities would be open on the 1st of June, and the second situation would be, and for both we can have almost equal opportunities or equal probabilities. So in risk situation, the outcomes are not one or distinct. There are more than one outcomes, and for each outcome we can assign certain probability. The uncertainty is the situation in which the likelihood or the probability of the outcome cannot be ascertained. And this was surely the COVID-19 was a very uncertainty-like situation, because if you go back to the November or December, even no one in the world was to the mid of December or aware of this kind of lockdown and this kind of high emergency, health emergency, public health emergency across the world. So this was certainly an uncertain conditions which was created by the coronavirus, novel coronavirus. And similar situations can come from the riots, from the strikes in the country, from political turmoil, from the earthquake, from any kind of natural disasters in which the situation cannot be in the control, and we cannot assign a very reasonable risk to this kind of situations. But certainly in the projects we try to cover the uncertainty also one way or the other. Now the concept of the risk is that we assign two things, that one is the probability and the other is outcome. And for each probability and outcome, we assign some outcome. So for example, what is the probability that university will be open on the 1st of June? So the outcome is the opening of university, and the probability which we can assign to this at the moment is not more than 50%. So we have 50% chance or probability that the universities will be opened on the 1st of June. Similarly, if we think about the financial risk management, basically this is more common when we are investing in the financial instruments, and we try to see that what are the exposure to the risk, credit risk, market risk, and other types, which include foreign exchange risk, shape, volatility, sector, liquidity, inflation, etc. So there are different kinds of risks we face in the financial investments. This is a general principle: the more risk and more returns, and definitely the highest risks are taken by the gamblers. If we look at the human, there can be three kinds of people. There can be risk averters. The risk averters are the people who would not take even a very small amount of risk. And then there are people who are risk neutral, or risk takers, who take the risk with certain reasonable analysis and rationality. And then there are gamblers who would like to take even 1% chance of success. So depending on the nature of the task and the nature of the person, there can be different kinds of people in terms of risk. So the general principle is that for high risk, you have a high return, and this is the more commonly used investment rules. Investment risk means how much returns vary from what you expect. Shares are the riskiest assets class. Share prices are highly volatile, meaning that they can rise and fall significantly in the short term. However, over the long term, they are often the best performing assets class. Similarly, the cash is the least risky because the cash you have always in hand and you can liquidate that in the market. So, but however, the returns on the cash is zero, or if you place that in the maybe you do some trade with that. This is telling us the various instruments we invest in the nature of risk. For example, the risk of the cash may be the lowest or low. The return is also very low. And this return can become coming from the interest or markup. And the time frame, maybe no time frame is required. You can encash your money anytime in the bank, from the bank. Fixed interest, which is having a low to medium risk, and the likely return is more than the cash, and it is maybe in the interest or markup, and we normally invest for 3 to 5 years. Property again has a medium risk, but the return is lower than share, but more than the fixed interest, and the return may be in the form of capital growth or rent of the property. And finally, we normally recommend that it should be 5 to 10 years. The shares, which are the most reliable instrument in the long term, maybe 10 years or more, and the risk is high, but also the return is all high, and the return is normally can't dividend or share or capital growth. The risk may be lower than expected, catastrophic. So we will discuss this in the next of the. For example, if we look at this, the example of a family, there can be different risks. For example, the family goals and objective, then you have the business goals and objective, and at the around that you have financial health. You may be having a price risk. We may be having environmental risk. There might be 5 Ds, which is death, disability, disagreement, divorce, and disaster. There might be production risk, human risk, human resources, relationship, public relation risk, and financial risk, legal risk. So these are some of the very common risks we can experience in the organizations. So all the potential outcomes, the probability of occurrence and cost of a desirable. So 3 components we normally try to understand when we are going for the risk assessment. We will discuss this in the now coming to the project risk management. Now the projects are also experiencing a lot of risks. We discussed in the last lecture last day that the risks are coming from different sources, like the availability of material, labor, the time overrun, the cost overrun, and things like that. So the situations may not go as we have planned in the project, and we are always faced with the different kinds of situation, and the risk management would certainly be required. So we try to include all the processes which are important to conduct the risk management, which include the risk planning, identification, response, and monitoring and control on projects. So these are different steps. So the first and the most important is the risk management plan, that what would be the approach and plan of the organization at the project risk management, and what are the different templates available, or rules and regulations available with the government or with the project team to deal with the risk, different types of risk. So these are the policy decisions and the policy guidelines which are provided by the corporate office. Then we go to the risk identification, which involves to see that what can be the different risk and their sources during the currency of project, and we document these. And then we go for the ranking of the risk. This is qualitative analysis. We try to see that what can be the top, first, second, third, and maybe 4, 5, 5th risk in the project, and we try to certainly rank these or prioritize these risks in an order of risk, and then we decide that what are the very high risk and very high risk and medium risk and low risk, and we would discuss this in the next is quantification of the risk, which involves to determine the impact of any risk environment in terms of any dollar value of or Pak rupee value, which of course is very difficult to assess in many cases, but certainly in order to make a decision about the risk, we need to quantify the risk. Then we develop the risk response strategy or planning for the particular project based on the different risk analysis. For example, if we come up with the top 5 risks which we need to deal with within the project, then we develop the plan to deal with such kind of projects, plans. And then, so all these 4 or 5 steps we have discussed earlier are done in the planning stage. And once we go to the execution, then we have the monitoring and controlling. And we try to see that whether the risk plan which we have developed in the project was successfully implemented or not. Because when we are doing the project, we come across many new risks. Certainly, for example, in one of the projects we are doing of the engineering faculty, we had the many risks like the weather, then there was availability of material, the low price of the contractor, the availability of local expert laborers, and now on top of all these, we are facing the COVID-19 situation, in which the availability of material and labor has become further very challenging. We will discuss these six steps in the risk management. We discussed the risk planning, risk identification, qualitative analysis, quantitative analysis, then risk response plan, and finally risk monitoring. This is the same flow chart which is based on the same method. The planning, which is really very important, that when we are starting the project, we try to see that how can we develop the risk planning, which is how to approach and conduct the risk management activities for a project. The risk management planning process should be completed early during project planning. This is one of the first and most important thing we need to do at the planning stage of the project, to see that how the various risks would be tackled during the currency of projects. So for this, we may have the planning meetings and analysis, project team or planning meetings to develop the risk management plan. Attendees of these meetings may include the project manager, selected project team members, and stakeholders, anyone in the organization with responsibility to manage the risk planning and execution activities, and others as needed. So this is normally done at the corporate level, in which we try to see that what can be the risk available. And normally this is done during the planning and the project concept stage, in which we try to see the various sources of the risks. So a typical project risk plan may include the methodology, which include the approaches. We would apply the tools, the data sources, roles and responsibility, who will lead and who will support and who will be providing the risk management supports. For example, we develop the team membership for each type of activity in the risk management, assign people to these roles, and clarify the responsibilities. We also budget the resources in case of different events of risks. Then we go for the timing, for example, when and how the risk management processes will be performed. And then we also define the categories of risk based on the corporate definition, like very high, medium, and low risk. And then we also develop the probability and impact assessment for various kind of situations. And this is normally at the corporate level. This is, we discussed this last time also, that there is always a risk breakdown structure, just like a work breakdown structure, that we try to see that what are the sources of risk in the project. For example, a project may have the technical risk, there might be external risk, there might be organizational or project management team risk, and there might be project. So So this hierarchical diagram is a breakdown structure of the risk in the project under each category of the structure. This is another tool we are using, the probability and impact matrix. On the left side, you see that the four core consideration, that is cost, time, scope, and quality. And then we see that if the cost is increased, or there is increase of 5%, then it is treated as very low. The cost, insignificant cost increase, the insignificant time increase, the scope decrease barely noticeable, the quality degradation barely noticeable. So this kind of very low probability we normally assign. Then we go to the 10%. The cost increase is less than 10%, the time increase is less than 5%. So this again is treated as low, and then or the probability of this event may be 10% or less. The moderate, where the cost increases more than 10 to 20%, and the time increases 5 to 10%. The scope is affected, the quality is affected in major areas. So this is a moderate type of risk in the projects. And if this kind is if the probability of a risk is 20%, or it has the following attributes, then we would call it moderate risk. For high risk, these are the events which have a probability of 40%. For example, in case of cost, if the increase is more than 20 to 40%, if the time increases 20 to 20%, and if the scope reduction is unacceptable to sponsor, this is a very high risk situation. And if the quality is unacceptable to sponsor, the quality compromise or the quality decrease is not acceptable to the sponsor. In very high risk category, all the events which have very high probability of occurrence, like 80%, or if the cost is more than 40% increase, if the time increases more than 20%, and if the project end item is effectively useless, the scope is so badly managed, and if the quality is useless in many attributes, then certainly this is a very high risk situation. Now we coming to the particular project. We identify the projects within the project. We try to see that the project manager, the contractor, the project team is set with the customer to see that what are the major project sources of risks. Now we have different kinds of tool. For example, we may go for the documentation review, that we see the project plans, prior project files, and other information, or we also go to the risk statement given in the project proposals. So we try to evaluate the project documents and see that what can be the sources of different risks. Then we also try to gather information through different techniques. One of the most common is brainstorming techniques, in which we set with the multidisciplinary set of experts, and they have a brainstorming to see that what can be the major risks which the project can undertake. And then there is a Delphi technique, which is also a way to reach a consensus, but this is anonymous because the responses of the team are not shared, and we keep on doing these iterations till we reach the consensus or anonymously. This is more like brainstorming, but here the respondent is not given the identity, and without showing his name, we try to create a consensus. Interviewing is another very common method in which we interview the most senior people and the project managers to get the data about the probable risks in the project based on their experience. And then another very important is the root cause analysis, in which we try to see that if, for example, we have the 4 or 5 major components in the project, like we have the labor, we have the material, we have some other management. So we try to see that how can, if there is a problem with the supply of material, then what can be the different risk associated with this problem. The SWOT analysis very commonly done in the engineering projects as well as the non-engineering projects, and we try to see the strengths and weaknesses within the organization and opportunities, threats outside the organization. And these are the analysis we try to do and see that what can be the various strengths in case of any risk and what can be the weaknesses which can make us more vulnerable within the organization to different types of risks. And then what are the opportunities which these risks can bring to us, and what are the threats from the outside which the risk can give. For example, when we looked into this online education in the Karakoram University, some of the strengths we really could see were the very young, energetic faculty who are really willing to come to the online education. We had good IT team. At least the computer science department was having good skills, and there were some good developers. We already had an LMS which was being developed, and there were quite good acceptability of this LMS within the organization because for last 1.5 years we were trying to educate the people about the LMS and its attributes. The second was the weakness. We have a couple of weaknesses. For example, the biggest weakness is the readiness of the students, the availability of platform and infrastructure within the organization for online education. We don't have purpose-built studios. We don't have many other places where we can have this online recording and things like that. Now, the opportunities we can have out of this online education is that being a university placed in a very remote area, if the online education and this learning and e-learning is successfully delivered, this can create a lot of opportunities for us to continue with this online education and educate the people in the remote areas of Gilgit-Baltistan. Now, the threats we are having from the society, from the biggest threat is coming from the availability of the internet and the speed of internet, because we could survey and where only 20 to 25% of the students have access to the internet through their cell phone, but unfortunately the speed of the internet again is very big issue in this, because we have only one service provider, and that is Special Communication Organization, ESCOM, and that is something SCO, and that is something which makes a lot of. Another threat is the acceptability from the students, because the students are mostly mediocre, or they are coming from very poor families, so their families may not be able to accept this kind of feasibility, the availability of gadgets with them, equipment and things like that, which are used in the online education, can be another threat to with us. Now, in the analysis, once we identify the various sources of risk, we try to analyze these. So we go to the analysis stage, and the analysis is basically one is the qualitative analysis, and the second is quantitative analysis. Now, for each risk category, our risk we identified, we are now going to evaluate the priority and ranking of the risk, and also its quantification. So in qualitative risk analysis, the method of prioritizing or ranking the identified risk for further action, such as quantitative risk analysis. So qualitative risk analysis is usually a rapid and cost-effective means of the establishing priorities of risk response planning and lay the foundation for quantitative risk analysis if this is required. So for example, if within the project we could identify 10 risks, then initially we quantify them in the sense that we may not be able to address all the 10 risks. So we try to qualify. Our qualitative analysis may tell us that what are the top 3, 4, or 5 risks we need to further deal with, and that would be the ranking or prioritizing of the risk. So we assign 2 things which are very important, that one is probability and the other is impact. That for each risk event, we have 2 things to ascertain. The one is the probability of its occurrence, and the other is the impact in dollar values are the impact on people, impact on organization, impact on the system. So the impact is basically the undesirable outcome. So the undesirable outcome is impact, whereas the probability is the likelihood of the occurrence of that event. And that may be in the impact of cost, scope, inequality, and time. So these are basically then defining as the different types of quality. For example, we developed after this qualitative analysis, we developed the risk register, which is telling us all the probable risk. Then we identify the root causes. Then we list the potential responses for each kind of risk. Then we also identify the root causes, and then we update the risk categories. There might be some initial categories available in the risk plane. We also develop some checklist based on the already available checklist or templates divided by the organization to see that whether the risk exists or not. We also do for the assumption analysis or sensitivity analysis, in which we try to see that what would be different assumptions of the project and what can be the situation if the assumptions are not proved correct, or some of the assumptions. This is sometimes called the sensitivity analysis. And then we go for the diagrammatic techniques like cause and effect diagrams, system or process flow charts, influence diagrams. So these are different tools we normally use to assess qualitatively the risks. This is just telling us the different probabilities for different types of situations, and we will discuss this in the next. The qualitative risk assessment methods are quick and relatively easy to use. Broad consequences and likelihood can be identified. They can provide a general understanding of comparative risk between risk events, and the risk matrix can be used to separate risk events into risk classes. So the risk events can be classified into different categories of risk, like very high risk, moderate risk, low risk. So 4 or 5 categories of risk can be defined based on the qualitative analysis. The risk we already defined that it is the outcome of the consequence or impact multiplied by the probability. The consequences may be described as insignificant, which is level 1, minor level 2, moderate level 3, major level 4, or catastrophic level 5. Similarly, the likelihood can also be determined as almost certain level A, likely level B, possible level C, unlikely level D, or rare level E. Output from qualitative risk analysis are usually evaluated using the risk matrix format, and we will show you a risk format in the next slide. For example, if the likelihood is high, the consequence is low, but the probability is high. For example, the probability of non-availability of the skilled laborers in the project is very high in the COVID-19 situation, lockdown, but the consequence can be low, medium can be low if the project is in a case where the risk is not in, the labor is not involved. So this can be low risk, and we call it a low consequence, and we can call it medium risk. But if we are needing a very high level of labor in the project, then the consequence will be very high in terms of non-availability of the labor, and we can class this as a high risk. Similarly, the likelihood may be low, the probability may be low, maybe less than 50%. There might be less than 50% chances that the prices of the material would increase. But if the consequence of this likelihood is low, then definitely is a low risk. But if the consequence of this even low change is high, for example, the non-availability of the steel in time may delay the pouring of concrete for another month, then definitely we can have a high consequence, and the risk can be medium. So with low likelihood and high consequence, we normally have the medium risk. So based on these definitions and classification, we may try to see that what can be the different categories of risk and we can develop. This is telling us the situation, for example, on vertical, we have the probability, and on horizontal, we have the consequence or impact. For example, the likelihood may be very high, the probability may be almost certain, but if the impact or consequence is insignificant, then it is insignificant, it is A1. But if it is even minor, this is A2. And if it is moderate, then it's A3. And if it is major, though the likelihood is also very high and the impact is also very major, so we go from mild to very high category, extreme level of. So based on this, you see that the red classes of categories show the extreme or very high risk categories, whereas the purple or the not purple, yellow, or something like orange is showing us a high level of categories, whereas the yellow is telling the moderate, whereas the light yellow. So within C1, D1, E1, D2, E2, we have the low level of risk categories, and from B1, C2, D3, E3, we have the moderate, and then B2, B3, C3, B4, E4, and E5, we have the high category, and A3, A4, B4, C4, A5, B5, C5, D5, we have the extreme or high level of category. So based on this definition, we can then categorize the risk we have identified in the previous step. The consequences are rated in terms of the potential impact on the criteria, often 5 points, descriptive scale linked to the criteria identified in this context, and we have already defined from in the previous that insignificant, minor, moderate, major, and catastrophe. So this is the consequence. Scaling of consequences is further giving us that, for example, what we mean by catastrophic, it means that extreme event which is potential for very large financial cost or delays or damage to the organization's reputation. We have a catastrophic situation at the moment in organizations, and certainly this category of risk we are experiencing in the COVID-19 can be declared as a very high or extreme risk. The major risk category is a critical event, potential or major cost or delays are inappropriate products. The moderate kind of risks are large impact but can be managed with efforts using standard procedures. In the minor kind of impacts, we can have the routine management procedure, and in an insignificant, the risk may be very small and it can be neglected. So it is further has been, for example, if the probability is more than 80%, then it can be had as well a kind of risk which is almost certain. If the probability is between 0.5 or 50 to 80%, then it is likely, and if it is from 10 to 50%, it can be possible, and if it is 2 to 10%, it may be unlikely, and if it is less than 2%, it simply can be rare. And this kind of events we define in terms of its occurrence also. For example, a very high may occur at least several times per year. Likely may occur once per year. Possible may occur 1 to 10 years per year. Unlikely may occur maybe 10 to 40 years, and rare may occur maybe in next 40 years or more. So once we evaluate the risk based on the probability and the impact, we come up with the various categories of risk, and we try to evaluate this risk for the organization. We may adjust the priorities of the risk based on the evaluation. Maybe the initial plan, we might have not given a very high risk category to a particular risk, but now after evaluation, we may revise the priorities or the ranking of the risk we had. So the risk data quality assessment, a qualitative risk analysis requires accurate and unbiased data if it is credible. Analysis of the quality of risk data is technique to evaluate the degree to which data about the risk is useful for risk management. It involves examining the degree to which the risk is understood and the accuracy, quality, reliability, and integrity of the data about the risk. Risk categorization, we discussed this in the previous slides, that we categorize the risk based on the probability and the event or impact. And then we classify these risks into different categories. And then we develop the risk urgency assessment, that how the risk can be based on the urgency. For example, if a risk is a very high or extreme category, then what can be the urgency assessment and how can we address this kind of risks? The risk registers are normally the documents in which we outline the risks which are based on their probability of occurrence. And we identify, for example, the number is given, the element group, a unique identifying number. And so these are various terms we are using for the risk register classification of different risks. This is a template for the risk register, for example, element, group, risk category, risk, existing control, C, L, and we define the C, for example, is the rating of the risk, L is the likelihood rating, agreed priority, inherent risk, action, and responsibility. So we can develop this kind of risk template or risk register in which we can identify various risks, its category, the priority, and the response, and then the responsibility in the organization. Now, the problems with the qualitative analysis is that these are imprecise, maybe these are highly subjective, and maybe there are some bias also because the qualitative analysis may not be having some quantification. It is difficult to compare events on a common basis. There is rarely clear distribution of weightages placed on severity. So this is again difficult that, for example, if you call an event severe, it may be severe in one circumstances, but it may not be severe. So the qualitative analysis or the subjective analysis of the process is again highly criticized. The outputs from the qualitative approaches are difficult to incorporate into financial business. So certainly the qualitative analysis will provide the foundation for the quantitative analysis. You cannot just rely on the only qualitative analysis for the good project risk analysis. So the qualitative analysis will certainly tell you the top 4 or 5 risks which you would like to address in the organization, in the project, and then you go for the quantification of the selected. For example, if the organization decides that we will try to see the 3 categories of risk which are very high, high, and medium, then we may, out of 20 or 25 risks we have identified, we may select the top 4 or 5 or maybe 10 to evaluate further to quantification. So this takes us to the, we discussed this. The quantitative risk analysis, is the name describes, is quantifying the risk in terms of dollar value, assess the probability of achieving specific project objective, identify risks requiring the most attention by quantifying their relative contribution to overall project risk, identify realistic and achievable cost, schedule, and scope targets given by the project risk. For example, if the project is delayed for 2 months, what can be its, and what is the probability of this? Let's suppose the probability of this in the current COVID situation is more than 80%, which is a very high level of probability or certain. And the impact is that the project can be delayed at least for 3 months. Or the project cost can increase at least for 10 or 20%. So we can assess the value of this impact in terms of the event when it happens. So the most common is the interweaving used to quantify the probability and impact of risk and project objectives. So based on the previous experience of the experts, we can then assign probability or value to the probability, and then we can go for probability distributions, which is continuous probability distribution. We can use some distribution like normal distribution, maybe chi-square distribution, maybe the t-student distribution. And we can also invite the experts, the panel group discussion, the focal group discussions to guide us to identify the probabilities of different events. The sensitivity analysis, we discussed this, that it examines the extent to which the uncertainty of each project element affects the project being examined. For example, each assumption of the project is then assessed. For example, if the project was initially thought that it will be completed within the accrued cost of 500 million, let's suppose, then we would try to see that if the cost is increased by 20%, what can be the overall impact on the project in case of delay, in case of quality. We can have another assumption like the students in the first year will be generated, maybe 1,000 students would be generated in the first year after completion of the project. But this may not be happening and we may get even lesser students. So this is a second. So under each element of risk and assumption, we try to identify the impact and we try to also quantify the sign probability. Another very common tool we will discuss later is the unmonetary value, expected monetary value, that under each category of risk, we try to see the probability and the expected outcome in terms of, for example, if the probability of the project, the cost increase is due to COVID is 0.8, and this cost increase will be 100 million, then the expected value, the expected monetary value will be probability multiplied by the event outcome. The outcome is increase in cost by 100 million and the probability is 80%. So if we 0.8 into 100, that would give us 80 million. So this is the expected value of this risk. Another is decision tree analysis, and we will discuss this in the next slide, that we develop the different scenarios and then we decide based on the probabilities and the monetary value of each probability and see that what can be the best route we can adopt. We can use the simulation modeling, very commonly used in the complex projects in which we develop the simulation based on different attributes and parameters and see that how these different attributes can combine to make a simulation model which can be used for different kinds of scenarios. This is a decision tree analysis, and we are faced with two decisions, two situations. The first is that whether we need to build a new machine. For example, we have a cement manufacturing plant which is producing something like 1,000 bags per day. And now we want to increase the capacity of our company, our factory by 2,000. That is 100% increase in the capacity. So we have the two options with us. So decisions which we need to be made are whether we build a new plant by retiring the previous plant, or by salvaging the previous plant, or we come up with the upgrading the present. So there can be two situations. The one is the build new plant. This is the decision node, and upgrade the existing plant. Now, when we go to the first situation, that if the demand for the cement is good in the next 5 years, which is the project life cycle, then the probability of this is 65%, which means that if the demand is really very high, we may earn $200 million from this proposition. And if the demand is weak, there is 35% probability we may earn $90 million out of this decision. And since the investment into the new plant is 120 million, which is the cost, then for the first strong demand, if we multiply 0.65 to 130 or 200 million, it would become something like So 130, 65 multiplied by 200 is 130, and the chance node is 41.5 million. And if we go to the second weak demand, that is minus 30, that would mean that from 200 we subtract 120, and we are having 80 million for the first, and the second we have 90 million, and we invest 120 million, so we would put 130 million from our own pocket. Now the second, now the chance is probability 0.65 multiplied by 80 minus 0.35 multiplied by 30. So if we multiply the 80 by 65% minus, which is the minus, so the total net outcome, we call it expected monetary value of this chance, is something like 41.5 million. If we go to the second decision node, that we would need $50 million to upgrade the existing model. And if we are doing in the strong demand, this plant will earn something like 120 million. And if we subtract that from the 50 million, which is the initial cost, we will get a profit of 70 million. And if the demand is weak, we still can earn something like 60 million, and the chance is 35%. And if we subtract these 60 million from 50 million cost, we are having 10 million. Now the total outcome of this node is 0.65 into 70 minus plus 0.35 into 10, and that is becoming 49 million. So if you see the decision number 2, which is upgrading the existing plant, is giving the expected monetary value of 49 million is against the 41.5 million, which was for building the new plant. So certainly in this kind of decision, this decision analysis or tree analysis gives us the decision that we, instead of building the new plant, we should go for upgrading the plant, the existing plant, and we will put less investment and we will get more return. In both the scenario, for example, if the demand is very high, strong, or if the demand is weak, in both the cases, we will have a good return because our initial investment will be very low and we will have a good earned value, earned monetary, expected monetary value. Third, once we quantify the risk in terms of the probability and in terms of the monetary value, then definitely we come up with the risk response plan, that what are the different kinds of responses we need to do in order to deal with the, for example, in the construction projects, we have 3 or 4 types of risks. The first is risk performance. In this risk, the performance risk, the contractor may not be performing as to the requirements of the project, quality or cost or time. The second risk normally come from the for any advance payment made to the contractor against some material or for mobilization. So this is another risk condition that the contractor may not come to the terms, and sometimes they may abscond. The third is the material and the machinery and equipment risk, that there might be some problem at site and the machinery and equipment may be stolen, may be damaged due to some slide. There can be a risk like work risk, which we call the work risk. And the work risk is normally the risk associated with the work in case of any circumstances which are beyond the human control, like we have the earthquakes, we have the force majeure conditions, like we have the floods, we have the larger slides, and many other risks, disaster-like conditions. So that is the risk. So for all these kinds of, and then maybe some small quality risk at sites, which we normally, so based on these, we require different kind of strategy. The first is the risk avoidance. Now, certainly the risk avoidance means that you try to make your risk response plan or your planning so robust and so concrete and good that the risk is not allowed to happen. But certainly, this kind of strategy would like to have additional money, and you would need to have a very high cost of this kind of decision. For example, if you try to see that there is no casualties of the staff, contractor labor at site, and you try to avoid, then definitely you have to have a very high level of safety. And for this, you have to have a very high level of investment in which you provide all the personal protective equipment, you provide proper railing, you provide proper scaffolding, you provide all the requirement at the best level required by the safety regulations. So this can certainly avoid these accidents at the site, but you have to put a very high investment. The second is that you try to transfer this risk to someone else, and normally we are doing this through the insurances. We try to transfer the risk to the contractor through the bank securities, through the bank, insurance of work, insurance of equipment, insurance of the staff, and maybe insurance of the performance insurance or guarantees. So we use different type guarantees and insurances for the transfer of risk. And mitigation is basically we try to reduce the probability or impact through better management, through proactive management. For example, if we are expecting that the material would be becoming expensive, then we would try to invest in the material procurement first so that we can procure the sufficient material at site. There are some other strategies like status quo. Status quo is doing nothing, and these are normally the situations where the risks are very small in nature and where we don't need to take any big actions. So in that particular, for example, if the weather is not good for a week or a few days, then certainly we would not take any action, because this can be met through expediting the progress of project. And there might be the situation in which we share the risk and we take some of the risks by the client, and some of the risk is transferred. There might be some positive risk or opportunities. For example, in the COVID-19 situation, the prices of the POL has been decreased, so it is giving us an opportunity to this would definitely decrease the prices of the material also. For the project, it is an opportunity to procure maximum material and start the project. So we will try to exploit the strategy that we would try to maximize the opportunities of any positive risk we can have. We can share a positive risk involving allocating ownership to a third party who is best able to capture the opportunity for the benefit of the project. And we may enhance the size of opportunity by increasing probability and positive impact. So if there is a positive impact, we may try to enhance the probability as well as the positive impact. So based on this, we develop the contingent response strategy or contingency response strategy for different types of the risks based on the strategies we have discussed, and then we develop the risk plan. So the risk response plan is having the identified risk, their risk owners, output from qualitative and quantitative risk analysis, agreed upon risk strategies, specific actions to implement the chosen risk response strategy, symptoms and warning signs of the risk occurrence, budget and schedule activities required to implement the chosen responses, contingency reserves for different types of the risks, and then contingency plans for different types of risks. So we would try to identify the trigger points for different kinds of risk and the strategy and the responsibilities of different people in the organization to deal with that kind of particular risk. Fallback plans for use of reactions to risk that has occurred, residual risk. Even some of the risk may still be there, and we may not be able to address all the risk at the site. So the residual risks are also very important to consider. Secondary risks may occur which were not available in the first level, but when we implemented the risk response, then definitely some new risk may be coming. The contingency risk reserves that are calculated normally for the project to deal with this kind of risks. Lastly, once the risk is implemented, when the project is implemented, we go to the execution stage. Then we see that how the risk of the projects are moving, and we are consistently monitoring and controlling the risks. And for this, we are normally going for identifying, analyzing, and planning for newly arising risks, helping track and identify risk in those on the watch list, reanalyzing existing risk, monitoring trigger conditions for contingency plans, monitoring residual risks, and reviewing the execution of risk responses while evaluating their effectiveness. So these are that we keep on risk assessment. It's not only having the plans with you, the response plans, but more important is to see that how the projects are going and how these risks are appearing in the projects and what can be the response. So we are reassessing the risks throughout the projects by monitoring and evaluating these risks continuously, and periodically, maybe on a daily basis or maybe on a weekly basis, we assess the different categories of risks we have already identified and their responses. And then we may have some risk audits by some external risk auditors, or maybe within the company we have, organization we have. And then we came up with the trend analysis that what is, for example, if we were having a risk that there will be an increase in the cost of material, we would need to see that what is variance between the actual risk plan we had already made and what is the difference which is happening at site or at project. And then we would try to see the variance. For example, if the risk was increasing the cost, then what is the cost variance as compared to the actual plan? And if it is the quality or the scope or the time, then we would like to see the variances in these in terms of risks. We would try to see the technical performance measures, the accomplishment of the project with the project management plan. We normally have some reserve analysis throughout the execution. There may be some risks which we may not have identified, and we may have some allocations of contingency plan, normally up to 5% for this kind of decisions. We periodically have the risk status meetings with the clients, the contractors, the project manager teams to see that how the risks are properly monitored and what are the different kind of risks we have tackled or we are going to tackle, and what are the new expected risks which are not already considered. And this was really the COVID-19 brought a lot of new risks which we did not quantify previously in the project. Now, in the construction projects, we have different elements. For example, design, the project cost, risk management and mitigation plan. The risks, maybe, for example, the real estate, the property acquisition, relocation, condemned, imminent, public utilities risk. Then the right of way risk, the availability of land, financial risk, the political risk, environmental impacts, historical significance. We can have the contract phasing and packaging risk, community impact and public perceptions. This is again a very strong risk, high risk, public hearing, material equipment and construction techniques. So all these are the risks. Now the criteria for evaluation the risk in the construction industry may be the funding, the availability of money, the schedule, the time, the ridership, the operations, the safety and security. That would depend on the cost estimates. It may be design plans, the construction and scheduling, method of construction available, client ownership, guarantee requirements, deterministic and probabilistic methods. There are some risk assessment tools which are available at risk, commercial software like PERT, Master, Crystal Ball, Monte Carlo project risk analysis software, Primavera project planner. maybe now the P6 are advanced corporate versions, project-specific in-house models. There might be some corporate project-specific risk models with the organizations. This is just telling a case study of the Euroterno Urbano San John Puerto Rico tunnel. This was a rapid rail project, a high-capacity third rail system with a mixture of 8 grade, above grade, and underground sections, opening 10 miles in 16 sections with a construction value of $2.5 billion. The project delivery was design, build, operate, and maintain. Challenge dealing with the complexity of the managing multiple contracts and contractors tasked with design, construction, operations of the new transit system. This was the lesson learned from this when the project was completed, and you can see in this Tren Urbano. Develop a uniform non-conformances system with identical forms, logs, tracking procedures between all contractors involved. Reducing the number of quality control firms involved would have reduced the overall complexity of the quality problem and perhaps save time and cost. Consistent contract language would have resulted in more integrated and consistent programs and would have reduced the contract administration burden. This is another example, the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority, Washington, D.C. This was a regional metro rail system of $9.4 billion. First and second phase cost completed in January 2001 after 32 years construction effort. So you can just see the problem, a very high problematic project which took almost 32 years to complete. This was a design build project, and the challenges were motivate contractor to use, follow, and have confidence in quality assurance and quality control plan and quality assurance and quality control staff. Some of the lessons which were learned in this Washington Metro, the quality assurance plan can be an effective tool to ensure that quality work is performed, but the key to having a successful quality control program is integrating it to the work plan. The quality managers should be properly trained and have experience in the industry. The contractor must accept the quality manager as an integral part of the team and implement the quality control program as part of the regime. The owner, quality manager, and contractor must work together as a team and effectively communicate to the project goals will be achieved and project risk will be minimized and eliminated. Now, the modern day risk challenges, for example, Southeastern Pennsylvania Transportation Authority, they have Market Street Elevated Reconstruction Project, $567 million multi-year project to reconstruct the nearly 100-year-old elevated train system located within the highly urbanized area from 56th Street Station in the West Philadelphia to the Melbourne Station in East Delaware County. Heavy rail structure supported by approximately 11,000 feet of recurring structural steel bends. So the design element, there was a plan by the L, which was the company which was constructing this project. So thank you very much. With this, we complete our